Alright, so welcome back. So what we're going to look at today is how to add the row and column bond functionality. So let's just kind of talk about how we can break this down into little bits and pieces here so that we can make it easier and so that you understand the logic where it came from, so that in the future maybe you can do that logic yourself on something you might want to add. So we have our board here, which I feel like I've sketched out like a million times by now. And we have these dots that are positioned in the board world. Now I've already gone through and created a PNG file that we're going to add to any dot to mark it as being a row or a column bomb. I'm just going to use the same PNG file and rotate it in the game world. So let's say that this one right here has a column bomb on it, and it matches with this one here and this one here. We want to make sure that when we swap these, we have something that checks when we're going through to check to see if we have a match. Something that checks to see if any of these are a column bomb. So we're going to need to have a boolean that says whether or not it's a column bomb. So we'll say is column bomb. I like nice big variable names that are good and descriptive so that when I come back to my project, I don't forget what I was doing months later. So we're going to switch this. We're going to check to see if any of these are column bombs. If they are column bombs, then we're going to kind of reroute ourselves, and we're going to get all of the pieces in the row. So not the row, the column. So we're going to get all pieces in that column, and we're going to turn all of those pieces to be is matched. So we're going to make them matched. And then when we have our routine that goes through and checks to see if there are any that is matched, it will register not just these three, but also anything in that column where I had the column bomb at. And it's the exact same thing for the row. So we're going to have to do like is row bomb, and then we want to get all pieces in the row, and we want to check to see if any of these are a row bomb, and if they are, we're going to turn all of those pieces to be matched. All right, so let's get started. All right, so here's our project here. I know the colors keep changing, pardon me, but I was able to recover the original project, so I put them back to how I had them. So again, we have this particle system that shows up when we destroy two objects. I might tweak that particle system some more, but I won't do that on camera. Anyway, and then when we're making a match, we can't make another match for a short amount of time. And if we switch two things that don't make a match, they switch back. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my art folder. I'm going to find that arrow icon that I created, which I have on my desktop. I'll include this in the project resources folder. I'm just going to pull this into my world, into my art folder. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this because right now it's 512 by 512. It doesn't take up the whole thing, but the file itself is 512 by 512. I'm going to set this pixels per unit to be 512, and I'm going to click apply, and I'm not going to worry about any of that other stuff here right now. However, if you are using like a nice something that's higher density, higher pixel density than 512 by 512, and you see like these jagged edges show up, you want to make sure that you're clicking generate bitmaps. It's kind of like a level of detail system that allows you to have higher pixel count images at a lower pixel count and have it not appear super jagged. Anyway, so back to here. What I want to do is I want to kind of create some prefabs for my arrow. So I'm going to drag it into the scene. And okay, I'm going to rename this is going to be my row arrow. So I'm going to rename it row arrow. And then I'm going to duplicate this. Actually, before I do that, I want this to always appear in front of my dot. And if I go, just grab one of my dots here, grab dark green dot, and put it out. We're going to be using the sorting layers to make sure that the arrow always appears on top. Because right now, if I go to my row arrow and pull it over, see how it kind of goes behind the dot there? How I can fix that is if I go to my row arrow and then the sprite renderer component, I can change the sorting layer if I want to, or I can change the order in layer. Right now these are both in the default sorting layer. If you look here, default. if I give this a higher number than 0, so say 1, then it's going to render on top of anything with a lower sorting order. So there we go. So I'm just going to make sure that my order in layer is 1. And let me duplicate this. Command D on a Mac or Control D on Windows. I'm going to call this column arrow. Now, when I generate the column arrow, I don't want to have to mess around with the rotation when I instantiate it. So instead, I'm going to put this inside of another game object and then rotate its rotation inside that game object. So the game object will have regular rotation. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go over here to create. I'm going to choose a empty game object. And I'm just going to call this maybe column arrow holder. I'm going to put my column arrow inside of that empty game object. Oops. Inside of it. There we go. Now, my column arrow holder is this position in space right here. My column arrow is way the heck over here. So I'm going to 0 its position on X, Y, and Z. So 0, 0, 0. And that's not world space 0, 0, 0. That's relative to its parent. Okay, and now I'm going to take my column arrow. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the Z-axis. The reason I'm doing this in here is now I can instantiate the column arrow holder, and I don't have to worry about the rotation. I can instantiate it at quaternion.identity, and it'll be fine, and it'll still look like it's rotated 90 degrees because that rotation happens inside of a child object. All right, so I'm going to go to my prefabs down here, and I'm going to add my column arrow, and I'm going to add my row arrow. And you'll know that they become prefabs as soon as they turn blue. And now I don't need any of these things in my scene, so I'm just going to delete them. Delete and delete. All right, so now let's take a look at our scripts here. Oops, I put the row arrow in the wrong place. There we go. Are they both in here now, like they should be? Column arrow, row arrow. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go to my scripts. I'm going to find my dot script, and I need to add a few variables to that for checks. I need to add the variable to check to see if it's a column bomb, if it's a row bomb, and then I also need to add a reference to what the column and row arrows are. So as soon as this gets all loaded up, we'll take a look at doing that. Okay, so we're back in our dot script here. I'm going to go all the way up to the top. I'm going to organize this just a little bit. So I've got all these private variables. Those aren't going to show up in my inspector. So I'm going to make a little header here for the swipe angle stuff. And I'm going to call this header and swipe stuff. And that just makes it so that I can see these are different than those. These are my board variables. These are my swipe variables. I'm going to create a couple references here. So I'm going to do another header, and I'm going to call this, like, I don't know, power up stuff or something like that. Header, power up stuff. Super descriptive. So I'm going to have a public bool, which I'm going to call is column bomb, and I'm making this public so that I can call it from the board script when I generate it. And I'm going to do a public bool is row bomb, and I'm going to make a reference to those two game objects. So public game object row arrow, and public game object column arrow. Now, we're not going to cover generating these when there's a match of 4 today, but we will be covering that in the next video. So for today, I'm going to add some stuff that's for debug purposes. So I can get rid of this find matches call here. So what I want to do is I'm going to create just a method here, just in front of update. And I'm going to put a comment saying, this is for testing and debug only. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to turn any single piece into a row bomb or a column bomb whenever I want to. So let's say void on mouse over which is listening for if the mouse pointer is hovering over this object. I'm going to say if input.get mouse button down, and I'm going to have it be the right mouse button here. And again, this is just for testing purposes. So if I click the right mouse button, I'm going to say let's do column bomb first. So is column bomb is true. And I'm also going to say that game object arrow is equal to instantiate. So now I'm instantiating the arrow. And since I'm doing column bomb, I'm going to instantiate the column arrow. And I'm going to do it at transform.position and at quaternion.identity. So just the regular rotation. Then I want to make sure that since I have the pieces sliding in, if I just instantiate it at that point, if the pieces move, the arrow is going to stay where it was because the arrow isn't moving. So I want to, which is why I'm doing this game object arrow part here. So I'm going to make it a child of whichever piece it was generated on. So I'm going to say arrow.transform.parent is equal to this .transform. So the parent of the child is this. And I don't have to do the this part. I just like doing it because it helps me understand if I come back through here and take a look. Okay, the other thing I want to do is in the start method, I want to set both of those to be false because otherwise I've been finding that as soon as one becomes a column bomb or a row bomb, then whenever anything else instantiates, it's always a column bomb or a row bomb. So I'm going to set is column bomb is false and is row bomb is false. Okay, so now all I've done so far, I haven't entered any of the code for it. All I've done is I've made it so that once we get everything wired up, if I mouse over something and press the right button, I should be able to turn it into a column bomb. And this is, like I said, for debug purposes. So I'm going to go to my prefabs, and I'm going to need to choose all of my dots at once. So I can do this by command clicking on a Mac or control clicking on a Windows computer. I don't want the arrow. Okay, I just want the dots. And they have the dot script here. And they need to know what the row arrow and what the column arrow is. So I'm going to drag in the column arrow, and I'm going to drag in the row arrow. Cool. So now, let's test this out. If I hit play, I have my pieces fall in. I'm going to hover over one, I'm going to right click, and I turn that into a column bomb. Right click, right click. I'm just doing this to make sure it looks fine. And yeah, that's not bad at all. All right, now let's test to make sure that the row bomb part works. So instead of changing it to a column bomb, let's make it a row bomb. And we're going to instantiate the row arrow. Okay, so if we jump back into Unity here, I'm going to test this out now. So as soon as it's done compiling. And you know what, I don't actually need all this. I'm just going to put I'm going to dock my game tag up there, and I'll put my console tab next to it. Okay, that way I have more space for my game. So I'll hit play, and everything's going to slide in. Okay, and now if I right click, they turn into row bombs. All right, cool. And it's got this kind of minimalistic style. I really like how this looks, but we'll talk about reskinning later if you want to make it look more like Candy Crush or I don't know, teddy bears or animals or whatever. Anyway, so now let's start getting the actual functionality in there. So what I want to do is I want to go to my find matches script, and let's just talk about how the find matches works again. So we have a list of our current matches, which we're using to be able to tell how many matches we have at a time. We have our coroutine here. Our coroutine waits for a small portion of a second, and then it checks everything. And so long as that thing exists, then it checks the left and right dots, and if they're all the same tag, then we do current matches.add left dot. And then we do the same thing here with the up and down dots, and then that's it. There's a whole bunch of braces down here, which makes it look a little more complex than it is. It's just that we have this whole chain of logic going on, these if statements and these for statements. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a couple helper methods first. So the first helper method I'm going to create is one that's going to allow me to get all pieces in, let's start with a column. So I'm going to go down here right before the end of the class, but after I have the end of find all matches coroutine. And if you ever don't know which brace goes where, if you just put your cursor next to it in Visual Studio, it'll highlight the matching cursor or the matching brace. So I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to call this, this isn't going to be a list, this is going to be, this isn't going to be a void, this is going to be something that returns something. So instead of returning nothing, like a void does, this is going to return a list of dots. So I'm going to say list of game objects, and I'm going to call this get column pieces, and it's going to require a column to know that. So I'm going to say integer column. All right, so in here, the reason this turns red is because I don't have a return statement somewhere, so I'll fix that in just a second. In here, I'm going to first initialize this list. So I'm going to say list of game objects, and we'll call it dots is equal to a new list of game objects. Then down here at the bottom, I'm going to say return dots, and then that'll fix that red. It's less angry now. Okay, so we want to be able to cycle through all of our pieces that are in our all dots array and check to see if they're in the column that we're in, and if they are, we're going to count them as being matched, and we're going to add them to our list. So we're going to say for, now this isn't going to be a double for loop because we have the column fixed. I'm going to say int I is equal to 0, I is less than board dot, and if this is column, we're going to do board dot height I++, and then in here I want to say if board dot all dots, and I want to do column I is not null, so if it exists, to kind of keep us from getting those null reference exception errors. So if it's not null, then we're going to do dots.add. We're going to add it to the list. Board.all dots, and the one we want is column I. And then we're also going to make that dot matched. So we're going to say board.all dots, column I. And since we want to do the matched part, that's part of the dot script, so I have to do dot get component. Component I want to get is the dot script. Dot is matched is true. Okay, and then we're just going to return that. We're going to do something really, really similar for getting the row pieces here. So let's go over that next. Okay, sorry about that weird little cut. So I'm going to do something really similar as a helper function for the row pieces too. So I'm going to copy this function here, and I'm just going to paste it down beneath it. I'm going to change column pieces to row pieces. So get row pieces. And instead of pulling in a column, I'm going to pull in a row. And I can still leave the dots alone.
Kyle Augustine, please report to the office. Kyle Augustine.
Okay, leave the dots alone. And I can change this from board.height to board.width because it's the rows. And instead of doing column I, I'm going to do I, comma, row. And then same thing here, I, comma, row. And then I, comma, row here too. All right, so I built these two helper functions here that will, given a row, it'll tell me all the other dots in the row, and it will add them to this dot list, which is going to return. But on top of that, it'll take all those other dots and match them as true. and then it'll do the same thing for columns. So in order to test that this is going to work, here's what I want to do. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to be checking my row first. So here where I'm checking in my final matches coroutine, when I'm checking to see if left dot is not equal to null, right dot is not equal to null, and then right underneath that I say if left dot tag is equal to the current dots tag and the right dots tag is equal to the current dots tag. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here because I should probably start commenting this stuff out. My code is getting really, really messy, and I should probably refactor this, but we'll get to that. All right, so what I want to do here is, okay, good, never mind, I'm sorry. So what I want to do here is I'm going to implement the row first. So I'm going to say if current dot get component, and the component I want to get is the dot script dot is row bomb, and then I don't want to have this super long line, so I'm just going to hit enter and do or left dot get component, not get hash code, get component, and the component I want to get is the dot, and I want to check if that is row bomb, and then one more or right dot get component, and the component I want to get is the dot is row bomb. So if any of those are true, then I want to find all of the other dots in the row, and I want to add that to my current matches. Now there's a few different ways I can do that. However, it's going to be simplest if I just union those two lists. And in order to union two lists in C#, you need to have an extra using tag up at the top. So up at the top here, where it says using system.collections, system collections generic, and Unity engine, I'm going to add using system.link. And system.link allows you to join two lists together. So, and it also like removes any overlapping. So I'm going to do current matches dot union, which you can only do if you have that using system.link tag up here. And I want it to union with get row pieces, and the row I want to get is the current row that we're on, which is J. So I'm gonna save this. All right, so now if we're looking at a row bomb, it should automatically turn all of the row pieces into bombs. So I'm gonna go back over here to my dot script, and yep, I already have it on the row part. So I'm doing this just to test that it works for the row part, and then I'll do it for the column part too. And then there's some extra stuff we need to do that gets a little more complicated. All right, sorry for that cut there. So we have everything done in our script, and we're coming back to our game here. If I press play, we're going to test out to see if the dot bomb is going to actually work. So let me zoom out. I'm going to find 3 that would make a row here really quickly. So I got these 2 yellows in that one. I'm going to right click to make that yellow a dot bomb, and when I go up, and there we go, whole row gets eliminated. Now this video has already taken a little while, so I'm going to put the rest of this into a second part that I'll get out hopefully tomorrow. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below, and have yourself a wonderful day.